This is Dennis Wagenaar, and in this video I'm going to talk about a disastrous river flood in China that happened in 1931, which took somewhere between 500,000 and 4 million lives. This is very extreme because river floods today typically take relatively few lives. If we look at the deadliest river floods of the current century, we see that no flood took more than 5,000 lives. So this river flood in China was 100 times to 400 times more deadly than the deadliest such floods in this century. So what happened in 1931 that made this flood so disastrous, and could it happen again? In 1912, 19 years before the flood, the ruling Qing dynasty in China fell after decades of mismanagement and economic decline. The fall led to a power vacuum and a civil war followed. In 1931, the year of the flood, peace had just somewhat returned, but as the rest of the world had been modernizing, the areas that would be hit by the flood in central China had seen a steep drop in welfare caused by the civil war and economic mismanagement. This economic downturn was an important factor in a large number of fatalities during the flood. The disaster took place on the Yangtze River. It's a river that flows from the Himalaya mountains in the west of China to Shanghai in the east. The river provides fertile agriculture land, and the banks of the river have been densely populated for centuries. Controlling the flood problems along this river has been an important task for every ruler in China and has made Chinese civilization possible. One of the main strategies to prevent flooding had been to build dikes. A dike is a structure made out of earth that prevents water from flooding the lands behind it. Dikes can be very safe, but they need to be maintained. And there are many things that can go wrong without proper maintenance. For example, to keep the earth from being eroded away by the river or the wind, it's crucial to have vegetation such as grass growing on a dike. Damage to this vegetation can lead to the earth eroding away and can eventually lead to a break of a dike. Such dike breaks can lead to a large flood wave of water coming down on the communities living behind it. Civil wars are not ideal circumstances to maintain dikes. So in the years leading to the flood, funds intended for the maintenance of the dikes went instead to the military or were embezzled by corrupt governors. This had happened for a good 100 years, as the government had become increasingly more corrupt during the end of the Qing dynasty. And even though the area was in economic decline, the population was booming. This made people move into the unprotected, fertile lands that belonged to the river and were very unsafe to live in. The stage was set for the worst flood in human history. The winter of 1931 was harsh and left large snow deposits upstream in the river catchment. In spring, this snow started melting. This coincided with large amounts of rainfall. Together, this led to water levels rising everywhere. By the end of spring, large areas along the Yangtze River were underwater. July made matters much worse. 7 cyclones hit China that month because of El Niño effects. The rainfall in the cyclones made the flooding much worse. By August, very large areas along the Yangtze were all flooded. Dike breaks had occurred, and the poor people who had moved into the risky places near the river had lost everything. Large numbers of refugees started leaving the countryside because their houses were flooded. The harvest in the entire region was lost. There was little to eat, and with the area still underwater, there was no work to do. Cities along the Yangtze overcrowded with refugees. These places had the best dikes, so they seemed safe. Yet many of these refugees had no place to stay and lived on the street. They had no toilets, drinking water wasn't clean, and there was little food. The water levels kept rising. The cities had better dikes than the countryside, but also the cities hadn't maintained the dikes as well as they should have. City dikes also started breaking. In several cities, large flood waves of water came down on the hungry refugees. Experts at the time estimated that about 150,000 people people drowned during such dike breaks. Sanitation in the areas hit by the disaster was horrible. People were drinking water polluted by human excrement, or cleaned food with this polluted water. These are ideal conditions for outbreaks of diseases transmitted by bacteria in human excrement, such as dysentery, typhoid, or cholera. Furthermore, standing water is the perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. The refugee camps therefore swarm with mosquitoes. Malaria is transmitted between humans using a mosquito as intermediary. A large number of humans sleeping outside in a swarm of mosquitoes is therefore the ideal condition for a large-scale malaria outbreak. Refugees who had survived the floodwater were therefore even more likely to die from one of these disease outbreaks. The weak central government tried to respond to the floods. The leader Chiang Kai-shek appointed his brother-in-law to lead the relief efforts. They would try to use modern science for the relief. Planes flew over, assessing the scale of the floods. Foreign experts from the League of Nations were brought in to help. Yet this was not enough to fix the fundamental problem of a failed harvest and a lack of resources. So China got a loan from the US to ship in American grain into the country. Yet this also failed, as the Japanese Navy, at war with China at the time, was blocking and delaying this shipment. Eventually some grain came through, but it was too little, too late, and a full-scale famine was taking place. Poor people who had survived the floodwaters and the disease were now forced to sell all their belongings for a bit of food, and some even had to turn to cannibalism to survive. Most of the deaths therefore came from hunger and disease, rather than from drowning. In the years after the flood protection got priority again, and thousands of kilometers of dike were reconstructed by the central government. Chiang Kai-shek also announced another plan. He wanted to construct an enormous dam in the Yangtze River. A dam controls the flow of water in the river. It creates an artificial lake behind it. When the river needs to discharge a lot of water, this water can be temporarily stored in the lake, so that the communities downstream won't receive too much water at once, and therefore they won't flood. Eventually, the water can then be slowly released to make space in the lake for the next river peak. The dam envisioned in the Yangtze would be the largest in the world, creating a 600-kilometer lake with an average width of about 2 kilometers. Added benefit would be that the dam could generate electricity for millions. The dam construction was however not feasible, because the civil wars escalated again and Japan had invaded the country. In 1935, the Yangtze flooded again. This time 135,000 people died, mostly because of disease and famine yet again. However, much less than 4 years earlier. Chaos lasted for several more decades, and the floods continued, with another large flood in 1954, this time killing 33,000. Yet China eventually united and stabilized. The government grew stronger, and in 2003, the Three Gorges Dam was completed in the Yangtze River, the largest dam ever built. In 2020, China was again plagued by extreme rainfall. The Yangtze grew large again and flooded at some places. Yet this time, the Three Gorges Dam controlled the flow, the dikes were well maintained, and there was plenty of food and good sanitation. 200 people still died from the flood, but it was very little compared to the similar floods from the 1930s. This shows that the disaster of 1931 wasn't just caused by the weather. It was caused by a combination of weather, poor flood protection, and a lack of outside help. So, could something like this happen again today? It's possible, but very unlikely. Help would probably be much better, and the dike systems would surely be maintained better almost anywhere in the world today. However, the flood serves as a reminder that without engineering, it's not possible to live so close to the river, and that when an area is neglected, a flood can take millions of lives.